Okay, so like I mentioned, I'm here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, as everybody is tediously aware, is ground zero for the 2024 campaign. The amount of propaganda that everybody is being bombarded with in this state is astounding. It was probably similar in previous years, but now it just seems like it's reaching a new level. Like you literally cannot turn on the television without seeing like 5 consecutive ads from politicians that are criticizing the other politicians. It's just suffusing the entire Commonwealth, and people might kind of just not be inhabiting the same world if you live in, I don't know, Vermont or Arkansas or Kentucky or Massachusetts or some other place that's not seen as hotly contested in this election. You inhabit a different world, and it really is bizarre. It's obviously to do with the structure of the U.S. electoral system, where we allocate electors by popular vote in individual states, and then whoever gets a majority in the electoral college wins, and therefore people pour into the states that are seen to be the most critical to winning the electoral college. And here we are in Pennsylvania. I've been across the country covering the elections. So I've been in Nevada, I've been in Arizona, I've been in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and now here I am concluding the spirited and wonderful 2024 campaign season here in Pennsylvania. And tonight I capped things off by just having gone to one of Donald J. Trump, you might have heard of him, one of Donald J. Trump's final rallies. Now, he could always, who knows, hold additional rallies if he wins, or even if he loses. It's difficult to say, but at least as of this campaign cycle, one of his final rallies was this afternoon in Reading, Pennsylvania, spelled deceptively as reading, but all the locals know that it's pronounced Reading, so make sure you have that down pat if you ever want to become a political prognosticator and discuss this particular micro section of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth. And there was an interesting occurrence at this Trump campaign rally that I was there to witness myself, where he gave a curious shout out to a particular political ally of his. And so let us play that clip of Donald Trump today at the rally in Reading, Pennsylvania, if we could.
So normally you see all these jobs, everything, hundreds of thousands of jobs just because of the size. And they just announced Mike. You'd be amazed at this. Mike, look at our Mike. Look at him. He lost all that weight. He looks so handsome. Stand up. Mike Pompeo. Stand up, Mike. He looks so handsome. Wow. Man, I'm going to ask him, how the hell did he do that? That's good. Good. That's great.
Okay, so I was sitting actually behind Pompeo, further up in the arena-style seating, and I saw him stand up. He waved to the crowd. Trump had prompted the crowd to give Mike Pompeo a nice round of applause. One of the few people that Trump actually singled out for praise in this particular event. And we've heard a lot, and one of the big Trump campaign themes is supposedly that he has this Avengers-style dream team of new people who are going to come in to a second Trump administration and combat the deep state or bring peace and prosperity and justice to America. And I've always found this a bit odd, because although people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and now Tulsi Gabbard and others are, promote this kind of fairy tale, Mike Pompeo has always been one of the foremost people in the Trump coalition, the Trump governing coalition. He was one of the few senior level administration officials in the first Trump administration with whom Trump never had a personal falling out. Trump first appointed Pompeo as CIA director and then elevated him to Secretary of State, in which capacity Pompeo served for the majority of the Trump presidency and carried out dutifully their joint policy initiatives. And one of those policy initiatives was to basically declare jihad against WikiLeaks, which when Pompeo was CIA director, he called a hostile non-state intelligence service and then directed the resources of the executive branch to combating and ultimately prosecuting in the form of Julian Assange, who, of course, was indicted in 2019 and then again with a superseding indictment in 2020. He was extracted from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, thrown into Belmarsh prison, and only a few months ago was he finally released when, under the Biden Department of Justice, Assange and his counsel arranged for a plea agreement that enabled him to leave prison and go back to Australia. So people kind of try to assert that there's some fundamental disparity or incongruence between Trump and Pompeo. And yet, Trump has been going around praising Pompeo. He told the radio host Hugh Hewitt recently that Pompeo is among the people that are in consideration by Trump for another senior level role in his forthcoming administration, which would make perfect sense because him and Pompeo were in total harmony as far as anybody could tell, while Trump was in power the first time. Trump even went on Joe Rogan and favorably name dropped Pompeo. And then now here Pompeo is going around in the Trump entourage, campaigning with him and getting called out by Trump as one of his favored backers. So, I mean, people can have this hallucinatory view of like what Trump might do because they bought into this whole RFK Jr. mythology, where because like RFK Jr. might have some ancillary role at the Food and Drug Administration with like removing toxin from the oil supply, from the soil supply, that therefore like Trump is going to have this new group of like heroic, superstars to dismantle the deep state. Trump himself is telling you who is within his sphere of influence, who is within his orbit. It's Mike Pompeo. And if you're a person who styles yourself or views yourself to be an enormous defender of WikiLeaks, as I've always been since, 2009, 10, when they first became prominent in American domestic politics and international affairs as well, then it's a massive bit of cognitive dissonance to then also be cheerleading for Donald Trump when he's telling you blatantly that Mike Pompeo is still in his good graces. Mike Pompeo also spoke at the Republican convention. I mean, this is not hidden. It's coming out of Donald Trump's own mouth. Now, if people want to employ some kind of circuitous reasoning and still claim that it's of urgent moral necessity to reinstate Republican executive power, okay, that's your prerogative, but at least go into it with some clarity as to what you're doing. I didn't vote for either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Not that anybody should particularly care about my own voting behavior, but I do think it's worthwhile to be at least transparent about what I've done. I've never bought into this whole taboo that certain journalists have where you're supposed to steadfastly conceal your own private political activity or voting behavior. That never made sense to me. And so I wrote out a whole explanation of why I did this. This was at mtracy.net. People can go look it up if they'd like, published over the weekend. We have hopefully a screen grab here. But one thing that I am trying to do is call attention to the legions, the tens of millions of non-voters who are constantly berated and hectored and lectured and scolded for not voting for one of the two major party candidates. Either they're voting third party or not voting at all, which I think is a perfectly valid position for people who are abstaining from the electoral process because they don't wish to concede that it has any legitimacy in their eyes. And there are so many voters across Pennsylvania. Before I get onto this, I do want to asked the producers to throw up the photo of the woman at the Trump rally who was sitting behind me. She was, a Spanish-speaking woman. And before I get onto my larger point, I just do want to point out that if you go and sit at one of these Trump rallies, Reading, Pennsylvania is heavily Latino, and there were lots of people who were cheering when Marco Rubio, supposedly one of the former neocons, quote unquote, who has been banished from the Republican Party under Trump, but is still also within the Trump sphere of influence, just like Tom Cotton, who is also sitting in the VIP section at this rally today. But I say too much in this regard, I guess, for some people. But I do want to point out just like the very clear diversity in the demographics that are supporting Trump this time around. I think it's very much probably almost even certain that Trump will receive a heavily diversified vote racially, ethnically, and religiously tomorrow, probably superseding or exceeding his the racial diversity of his vote in 2020 and 2016. And if anything, he might be going down with white voters overall, mostly highly educated white voters. If Trump does lose, it'll probably look something like college-educated white voters trending against him, just as happened between 2016 and 2020. And it's not offset sufficiently by the increased level of support from racial minorities that he receives, including that woman who happened to be behind me at the rally. And there were lots of other, diverse people at this rally. So, it cuts right against this fanciful idea that Trump is leading some sort of, quote, Nazi movement. It doesn't seem to include all that much of an appeal to like racial purification zealotry if you're including within the current iteration of the MAGA movement a very visibly diverse set of people. But anyway, the non-voter or the undecided voter, I think, is very interesting. So I also wrote today an article for Newsweek where I went and surveyed lots of undecided voters in Pennsylvania. And people, I think, have a misconception about what the prototypical undecided voter is this late in the election cycle. It's really not a voter that is determined to vote and is still trying to make his or her mind up between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Those voters do exist. You would never know it if you look at internet comment sections all day. But that voter does exist. But more often what you encounter are people who are undecided voters in the sense that they don't know whether it's even worth their time to go vote at all. They tend to have a disenchanted idea of the electoral process as a whole, skeptical toward the two major candidates, but they might be more favorable toward one or the other. But the decision point that they've yet to complete in their thought process is whether to even vote at all. And interestingly, a number of these people, if they were prodded, if they were maybe targeted by a competent Republican get out the vote operation, which we're told Elon Musk is funding in Pennsylvania, remains to be seen whether that's going to be effective. But I encountered more often than not among this like basket of voters who are undecided about whether to vote, almost more often than not. And again, I grant this is anecdotal, but like what else can I do in terms of conducting reportage than to compile anecdotes? More often than not, these people who are undecided about whether to vote, they have a preference for Trump, right? So they could be amenable to motivational interventions on the part of like some Republican apparatus to try to get them out to vote, to encourage them to be motivated enough to go act on their preference. But so far, they haven't been reached in that way, at least from what I have been able to gather in my sample size. So I've talked to 25 people, and there are a lot of people who reflect this kind of profile. And yesterday, I was out across different parts of most of Philadelphia suburbs with Megan O'Rourke, who's a producer here on the System Update show. And we were just kind of doing man on the street interviews, sometimes people can can maybe snicker at the utility of conducting man on the street interviews, but they're really pretty informative, I find, because you're kind of just doing a random sample of voters. And I particularly wanted to see if we could identify non-voters, right? People who are abstaining from the election, whether out of pure apathy or whether out of distaste for the two candidates or for any other reason. Because I think that that segment of voters are under analyzed. But first, I want to show you a clip of an interview that we did with a person who really reflects why I think more people should do man on the street type interviews, because you're bound to encounter a voter or a would-be voter who just defies any stereotypical expectation you might have. So let's go to the interview that we did with the young woman who was a Walmart worker.
So, what do you think about the election coming up?
I think this election is very important this time. It's a lot going on, so we need a good president, And I think Trump will be a good president, in my opinion, because he's actually done stuff in the office. I haven't really seen the vice president really do anything, even though being vice president. Yeah, so I just feel like a guy being a president is better, in my opinion.
Really?
Yes.
Explain.
I feel like if what's her name? I don't even.
Kamala
was president. I feel like we would be in war with other countries, because she would I don't know, females are very sensitive.
Wow. What do you like that Trump did when he was in office the first time?
I can't remember.
Okay.
But I know he did some stuff. People say they don't like Trump, but they have to understand he did do stuff while he was in office. So, yeah.
And what do you think about Kamala, other than that she's a woman? Do you think she's done a good job campaigning or no?
Okay, so I just wanted to play that, not because it's necessarily totally representative of anything in particular, but because you encounter all these amazing anecdotal stories about how people formulate their political views. And as somebody who covers politics for better or worse day in and day out, you can kind of get into certain patterns or rhythms in terms of how you kind of just assume that the electorate is shaping up. And, we came across a Walmart worker. She was actually 17, okay, but she was working at Walmart, so she's not eligible to vote this year. But she says her family is all voting for Trump. She wants Trump to win. She has some striking views as to whether a woman should be in office. And she's a young Black woman who's a low-wage worker at Walmart and supporting Trump. So I just throw that out there to say that there are so many manifestations of the voter that I think you only really encounter if you go out into the wild and just kind of talk to a random selection of people. Get off the internet. Not that the internet is totally useless, but in terms of encountering people who are kind of outside, to defy your expectations as to how people arrive at their political preferences, it's useful to go out and talk to people. So let's also play. So I had the bright idea of going to Walmart because I think that's sort of an instructive place to kind of talk to people who may be undecided or less engaged in the political process. So let's play that other interview that I did with the second woman at Walmart with her son.
So you said you haven't really been following the election much at all. What do you know, to the extent that you know anything?
I know that there is Kamala Harris, and I know Donald Trump.
Yes.
And
I know the perfect pick.
And he knows who he would pick.
Who would you pick?
Kamala Harris.
Why is that?
I don't trust Trump. I just don't trust Trump. I never trusted him.
What don't you like about Trump in particular? Was there anything he did when he was president the first time that you didn't like?
No, because I don't think I noticed anything yet.
You were young. You were just born.
How old are you?
9.
Okay, so you were just.
I was born in 2015.
Okay, so right at the end of Obama, and then Trump came in. And what do you like about Kamala, if anything?
I don't know. I just don't.
You just like her as an alternative to Trump.
Yes.
And you just haven't been following it.
I just haven't really been following. I didn't have any problems when Trump was in. I thought he was fine before, but I don't really know who's doing what this year, like who's, what everybody's talking about. I just really don't keep up
Have
with
you
it.
voted in the past?
I have not ever
Never.
in my life.
And why? You just don't think that there's enough at stake for you to
It's not that, it's just, I just never have. I really never have. But if I had to pick one, I would go back with Trump. Really? Just because he did fine before. Like, I just think I would choose him. That's it.
And what do you think of Kamala Harris?
Okay, so I play that because so she's obviously an infrequent voter. She has never voted, but she's saying that she has a preference for Trump. So this is like the prototypical modal voter that the get out the vote operations that are run by both parties would want to identify and then try to urge or motivate to vote. And it doesn't seem like that's happened with her. And I can give you a bunch of other examples of people who fit a similar profile. And so I one of my tentative theories here is that there's a fairly sizable untapped pool of voters who could lean Republican, who and I'm sorry, I'm getting the voices of other people in my head right now, so I'm losing my train of thought. My basic theory is that there does appear in Pennsylvania and other states to be a large and untapped, or seemingly untapped, pool of potential Trump or Republican voters who need a bit of extra motivation given their skepticism of the system or their low propensity to vote at all, who could potentially be motivated to vote if they were made contact with by like a get out the vote operation. But the Republicans don't seem, historically have not been as competent at utilizing get out the vote kind of methods as Democrats. And so if Trump does lose Pennsylvania, which I think everybody tells me it's a toss-up, so let's just go with that. But let's say if he does lose, I think a large share of the reason will be that voters such as this have not been contacted or persuaded or engaged with by these well-funded billionaire-funded groups who we're told are flooding the state with ads, but apparently don't have the wherewithal to identify this type of voter, who says that she would prefer Trump, but is just not interested enough in the election to bother.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.